Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to HBX's Geothermal Control Overview webinar today. Today we're going to be focusing on our two main geothermal controllers, our Eco 1000 and our Eco 550 controllers. Before we start the webinar, just kind of give you how we do it. Anytime you guys have questions throughout the webinar, just type it into the GoToWebinar questionnaire box, and I'll try my best to answer them during the webinar. If not, just depending on how fast we're going, I'll usually take about a 5-minute period at the end of the webinar just to answer any questions that you may have about our controllers. Other than that, we can get started on the geothermal overview webinar. Just kind of give you a little bit of information about HVX if you guys aren't familiar with us. We are a privately owned company out of Calgary, Alberta, and we design, engineer, and manufacture all our controllers. All our controllers are E-tail listed, which is kind of the biggest testing body in the world. By having that E-tail, we also are pretty much approved by the CSA and UN standards as well for controls. So the first controller we're going to be talking about is our Eco 1000 controller. So what really kind of the basis of the Eco 1000 is that it's kind of based around modular expandability. So the controller itself can do up to 2 heat pump stages, but we can add expansion modules to the controller to have us the capability of doing up to a total of 14 stages. So we can use this to control heat pumps, but we also can use chillers. So don't think that it's just a heat pump controller, but it can also do chillers as well on there. In terms of kind of functionality wise, we can do single or dual tank systems. So if you have one main buffer tank, hot and cold, we can control that as well. Or if you have 2 tanks, one hot and one cold, we can control both of those tanks with one geothermal controller. We also have outdoor reset on the hot tank on the Eco 1000. For the cold tank setup, it's just off of the set point off the Eco 1000, and we also can operate the reversing and diverting valves that switch over from heating to cooling and vice versa on there. We have a lot of different pump options, which we'll go through later on the slides onto the webinar. But this is kind of like the broad general overview of the Eco 1000. So in terms of key components on the 1000, as you see, we have a full graphic display. Kind of the nice thing about the Eco 1000 that everything's on 1 or 2 screens on there. So we give you a lot of information onto one screen. So you can see if it's in a heating or cooling demand. You can see if you have additional set points set up or set back options, and you can see your hot tank, cold tank, as well as the outdoor temperature all in one display. You can also navigate to a second screen, which will tell you your system, which will act as your system function screen options on there. In terms of the controller, there's just 4 buttons to navigate. You also see the serial number and barcode tracking. You also have a backup battery on the Eco 1000. So if your power were ever to go out during a power outage, that battery is there just to make sure that none of the settings get erased. We do have a built-in EEPROM on the controllers as well. So if that backup battery were ever to die, all the settings would get saved even though they have a power outage. But it's just really there to keep the time and the date on the Eco 1000 on there, as well as make sure that all your setback options are in place in terms of that power outage on there. We do have a communication connection, which is kind of been discontinued. We had the capability of adding the 1000 controllers remotely using Ethernet connection back in in the early 2010s, 2012s on there. But we've now decided to make everything go through a Wi-Fi network, which we'll talk about with our Eco 550 controller in terms of remote communication on there. The controller utilizes 3 demand outputs for heating and your cooling demands, so you can hook up a thermostat or 24-volt connection on there. You can put a jumper wire there to simulate a heating or cooling demand options on those demand outputs. We also have numerous thermistor and sensor outputs, so you could have a sensor for your hot tank, cold tank, as well as run an outdoor sensor to these units to provide outdoor reset for your hot tank on the 1000 controller. You have miscellaneous relays, which are used for your first and second stage of your heat pumps, and then 120 just to power up the unit itself. And then we have 3 120 volt outputs on there to control your pumps. So you can control up to 2 pumps. The last relay on the Eco 1000 is going to be to control your reversing valve, which you need to accommodate a relay in there to bring that down to 24 volts, because normally those reversing valves or diverting valves that require 24 volts to power them. So in terms of the modular expandability, as I mentioned before, the Eco 1000 can do up to 2 heat pump or chiller stages. If you needed to add on, system where it required 4 or 6 or even 8, heat pump stages, you would just add on these expansion modules. The way they connect to them just uses a 32-pin connector to the side of the controller to the main unit, and you can kind of just build these expansion modules up to 14 stages. In terms of expansion modules, you can only have a maximum number of 6, depending on, if you're using the XP100, and with the 300, you can only go up to 6 on there. So keep that in mind on there. You can also use our zone controller as an expansion modules to the Eco 1000. So with our zone 500, you essentially can have, as many zone 500s to the Eco 1000 in terms of you actually want to, zone out your zones for, in-floor heating or cooling with the Eco 1000. So in terms of adding these expansion modules, we have our EXP100. What we have there is we have 2 extra dry contacts built into the unit, and these dry contacts could be used for pumps if you wanted to, but really it's just more for adding stages. So you can keep adding 1 expansion, 2 or 3 to a maximum of 6 expansion modules with the XP100 for a total of 14 on there. The first stages, 1 and 2 is always going to be off the controller, but for that first EXP100, it's going to be stage 3 and 4, and so on as you keep adding on more expansion modules. With our EXP300, this is more, its purpose is for greater control of your pump in larger mechanical systems. So it has 2 wet contacts built onto the module itself. And when I talk about wet contacts, that means I already have 120 volts coming out of these units already. So you don't need to power up your EXP300 with 120 volts. You can wire your pumps directly to the XP terminals without wiring your pumps, without doing a bunch of interconnection or junction boxes to the controller. So in terms of navigating the controller, it's very easy with the Eco 1000. You have 4 buttons. You have your A, B, C, and D. A, B is to scroll down and scroll up. C is your select, that parameter and enter. And D is to get access to your menu or get into your previous screen in terms of, backing out of the controller. We do have a lockout feature on the Eco 1000, so if you were just to hold down the A and B button down for 10 seconds, it'll put that controller into lock. So once you've set up the controller, you don't want anyone messing around with the settings or anything, you have that option. To unlock it, it's simply just holding down the C and D button this time for 10 seconds, and unlocks the controller on the 1000. In terms of the user interfaces, when you power up the Eco 1000 for the very first time, it's going to give you the version number. In terms of the software, this can always be updated. So if you have an older version, you can always send it to us for updating purposes. That's not a problem as well. But we haven't really updated the software since 2014 on there, just because I think we've kind of got, in terms of a geothermal system, all the components that you really need onto the controller itself. So the Eco 1000, when you also power it up, it'll ask you to choose your control type. So this controller can actually be used for solar applications as well. So if you wanted to control, solar systems, either tubes or panels, control, up to a maximum of 4 solar tanks, you can use the Eco 1000, as a solar controller. But since we're talking about geothermal, you obviously want to select option number 1 into geothermal. That will get you into your geothermal settings on there. If you were accidentally, to choose, option number 2 into a solar controller, the only way to get out of that mode is just by resetting power onto the controller. And again, it will bring up that control type, and then you have access to go back into that geothermal applications on there. But again, with the user interfaces, as I mentioned before, you can see, all your information onto one screen, which is real nice. So here on the example, on your main system status screen, you can see your tank temperature, you can see your ground loop temperature, you can see your hot or cold tank temperatures, as well as your outdoor temperatures, and you can have an adjustment set point. So say you wanted to also control your domestic hot water for this project as well. So you can set that as a set point 1. So you can have a maximum of 3 different additional set points to your heat pump stages on there. If you wanted to see your runtime cycles on your equipment, you can access your system function screen. So here you can see your system pump cycles. You can see your heat pump cycles, and if you were to accommodate a backup heat source, you can see the cycles from that as well on there. So in terms of navigating through the controller, again, to get into your menu, you just want to enter and press and hold down the C button, which gets you into your control options. So here, you have 6 different options in terms of, you can see in graphing, you can, access your setback and set point options. If you want to change your design temperatures in terms of your system, you can see that as well. And then we have your control and geothermal options. So if you were to go into your control options here is really just access what you want to see onto the display here. So here you can change your current time and date. If you want to kind of reset the cycles in terms of your system pump or your heat pump, say something mechanically was installed incorrectly and you were like short cycling those heat pump as well as your backup boiler, you don't want to keep that those cycles within your system. Here you can reset those cycles back to 0 as well on there. You can also use the control options to test relays on there just to make sure your pumps and heat pumps are all activating when you first install this as well on there. And you can also set the controller to utilizing zone controller. So again, you can only use as an expansion module our zone controller, which is our zone 500. If you want to use that zone 500, you always want to make sure that that is set to yes in the control options, saying that, hey, this expansion module is for zone controller. We're not using this as additional staging or for greater pump control with our other expansion modules. So in terms of control options, if you were to go into our heat pump options, it's very straightforward. When you go into these heat pump options, you're simply just selecting how many heat pumps you're wanting to control on there. So if you had a total of anything less than 2, you're not using any expansion modules, you would just enter 2. If you're anything more than 2, it tells the controller that, hey, we are using expansion modules, and that will coordinate with those expansion modules. So in terms of how you place the expansion modules, you always want to put your staging first. So you would always have your EXP 100s first right next to the controller. And then if you had additional pumps that you wanted to control after those EXP 100s, that's when you want to do the XP 300s. And then at the end of the expansion modules, that's where you would want to put your zone control output. So sometimes I get people asking me, can I mix and match expansion modules? No, they all have to go through 100 to 300. And if you are zoning, you want to use the zone 500 on there. Other options within your geothermal options in terms of your heat pump, you have the options to use 2-stage heat pumps. So if you were to select, 1 2-stage heat pumps, that means, your first 2 contacts on the XP or your EQ1000 is going to be for that 1 heat pump, and then stage 1 and stage 2 is going to be for that second stage heat pump. You have options to, if you always want 1 heat pump to fire up all the time, first all the time, even doesn't matter even if you're rotating your heat pumps based off leg time or cycles. You have that option as well. Or if you always want 1 heat pump to fire up last all the time, you have that option within the 1000 as well. We can have lead lag again with all our heat pumps. It's all based off time, off of lag time, so you can adjust it from having that second or third heat pumps fire up within 1 minute up to 240 minutes within the Eco 1000 as well. And you can also have a maximum off lag time as well. So how you want to stage these heat pumps when the demand is no longer there. So you may want them to go off a little bit longer than bring them up on. So you can customize both of when you want to turn on and when you want to turn off within those options as well. In terms of pump control, you have the option to make the controller itself control the pumps. There's a lot of units within the heat pumps that'll operate on its own. So you would just tell the controller that, hey, I want to control the main circulating pumps within the 1000 as well. Again, we have post purge up on there from 1 minute or 1 second up to I think you can go up to 500 seconds on there. In terms of post purge, you can have your pumps running on all the time if you really wanted to, even though you don't have a heating or cooling demand on there. You can use the controller to control tank pumps, so it doesn't have to be the main system circulators. We can control that hot tank and cold tank pump right off the controller, as well as on the expansion modules. And then you have the option to use air to zone pumps on the controller. So if you wanted to control the pump for a fan coil, you can do that off the P1 terminal. Anything that comes off in terms of a heating or cooling heating demand, it'll come off that P2 pump controller off the Eco 1000 for your zone pumps options on there. So in terms of how you want to, use the 1000 in terms of your tank options, you can have it tell the controller, that you're using a single buffer tank for heating or cooling, or you can just tell the controller that we're doing a dual tank. Once you do a dual tank, it automatically changes the system interfaces from, displaying a hot and cold tank on there. So if you see a hot and cold tank, that means you've set it up for a dual system option on the 1000. In terms of your set points off your hot and cold tank, with the 1000, you can have a target set point all the time, or you can go off of outdoor reset just for the heating on the 1000. For a cold tank, it can only be a set point. We don't have that outdoor reset option for the cooling on the 1000. If you're just using these tanks, you're not utilizing a cold tank, you have the option of actually controlling two hot tanks with the 1000. So if you're just transferring heat, you want one tank to always be hotter than the other, just for storage purposes, you have that option with the 1000 to control up to two tanks, and both would go off of outdoor reset if you wanted to on there. You can have a hot and cold tank differential for both your tanks on there. So that really helps out for short cycling purposes as well. And you can also, activate, tell the controller that we're using that last relay on the 1000 to operate the reversing valve to switch over from heating to cooling on there. And you can also control the ground loop temperature on the 1000 as well on there. So a lot of different options in terms of how you want, the 1000 to control your tank options on there. In terms of controlling a backup heat source, we can control, up to one backup boiler. We can control more than one backup boiler or heat source if you wanted to, but you don't have lead lag with that as well. They would all come on at the same time. So typically we just kind of say that we can usually just control up to one backup heat source on there. Reason that you want to have some backup heat source is that heat pumps are becoming a lot more efficient. They're able to provide a lot more heat, but really depending on where you're located, you're just going to need some sort of backup heat to help out with your heat pumps to maintain those target temperatures that you'd want to make everything nice and comfortable on there. So if you are using a backup heat source, you simply just select yes on this control options. By simply selecting this yes, it'll come on as a lead lag that you've currently set up on your heat pump stages. So if you had it set up for 3 minutes, after your first or second stage heat pump hasn't satisfied that demand, it'll fire up that backup heat source on there. You have options to only use the backup boiler only. So this will lock out your heat pumps if you were to select this option, and that just comes off of temperature as well. So say, I only want my backup boiler to be operating at minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit, just because, really don't need my heat pumps to be firing up. My backup boiler can do, everything on its own. So it'll lock it out and just run the backup options on there. So you have that option as well, or you can have the backup come on based off of tank temperature. You can actually set both of them at the same time to work and coordinate with each other, but you have the option to use, coming off the outdoor air temperature or just tank temperature on there. So a couple different options on there. So in terms of, once you told the controller, how many heat pumps I want to do, this is the tank temperature. You also want to, put in your design temperature. So here we're doing everything from calculation in terms of your design room temperature, as well as your recommended design outdoor temperature recommended by ASHRAE. So this is the temperature that you would want to put into this parameter that, hey, this is the coldest day of the year that it gets here. So, for places like Wisconsin, you may want to put, minus 20, minus 30 degrees, and it will just work off outdoor reset based off, that temperature. You also have the ability to put in a minimum system temperature, so your system will never go below that as well. And then you have the options to put warm weather and cold weather shutdown options on there. So in terms of if you're just utilizing this controller, controlling one single tank system, once the controller goes into a warm weather shutdown, it automatically changes over that buffer tank into a cooling options, and vice versa. If it ever were to get, out of cold weather shutdown, it goes above that, it goes colder than that, then it goes into the heating option. So that's how we do the automatic switch over in terms of, the Eco 1000, as well as the heating and cooling demands that the controller receives on there. So you don't never have to manually adjust it from heating to cooling. It'll just do that off the demand outputs, as well as functionality wise of the cold weather and warm weather shutdown on there. Again, as I mentioned before, you have the option to incorporate up to 3 different set points. So these set points, big things that we always see is that, guys are doing the domestic hot water from that as well. So you can put that as a set point option to do that as well. But you may want to have a set point to control maybe your pool or hot tub options. So whatever you want to kind of just maintain a set point, you have the options to do that using the EXP100 on there. And that set point option is always going to be the last relay or the last EXP100 that you have attached to this, within your system. That will be the relay that's operating those set points on there. You also have setback options as well. So this is kind of like your temperature scheduling in terms of a residential commercial space. So maybe you don't want to have it as hot during the weekend just because no one's at the office on there. So you can actually change your design temperatures based off those setback options on there. So it's really, it's a nice feature to have, especially for those commercial spaces where, typically a lot of people aren't, there on those weekends on there. The 1000 controller also has the capability of doing some graphing, so we can actually graph the load and the source in terms of heating, in terms of graphing. So this can be used for troubleshooting purposes. Say something's mechanically has gone wrong, you can look back up to 7 days in terms of graphing to help you troubleshoot maybe a power failure were to happen. That's why maybe having some issues onto site on there. In terms of wiring, here's just kind of like a basic, schematic of, how you would wire up a Eco 1000 to an EXP100 on there. The XP100, again, is getting its power from the Eco 1000, which is real nice. And again, it just connects using a 32-pin connector on there. Again, your first 3 inputs is for your heating and cooling demands outputs. For this example, we're just using our thermostats, but you can use anyone's thermostats to control the heating and cooling, for the heating and cooling demands on there. One of the bigger things that we get tech calls in terms of the geothermal controllers is that people think that once the tank temperature drops below or above a certain set point, it automatically will send a heating or cooling demand depending on how it's set up on there. We always need a heating and cooling demand. We need some auxiliary controller out there, like a thermostat, to give the controller permission to actually turn on for heating or cooling on there. So you always want to make sure that if you're ever not getting any heating or cooling within your application, always want to make sure that when you look on the controller that you see an HD or CD. If you don't see those, that means that we actually don't need heating or cooling in those places, and that's why your heat pumps or your chillers are not operating at the present time. So that's just one of the biggest calls that we get in terms of tech support, is that the controller is just not getting those demands to to turn on your heat pumps. In terms of your sensors, again, on pins 7 and 8, 9 and 10, this is where you would hook up a hot tank or cold tank. If you were to just put a sensor on pins 7 and 8, that's telling the controller that we're again just utilizing a single tank system on there. 11 and 12 is for if you want to do outdoor reset within the controller. 13, 14, 15, and 16 is that's where you would wire up your first and second stage of your heat pump on there. Again, 120 just to power up the controller on pins 17 to 19, and then the last 3 relays again are line voltage rated for 240 volts at 10 amps on the 1000. It's also 10 amps on the expansion modules as well on there. Pins 5 and 6, 7 and 8 on the expansion module is where you wire up your third stage of your heat pump. That last relay again could be for your stage 4, but for this example we're utilizing a backup boiler, so that's where you would accommodate in terms of sequence, that's where you would wire up the backup boiler for that options on there. The last relay on the Eco 1000 on pins 26 and 27 and 28, again, is for a reversing valve. Since we do have line voltage there, just because this is the same manufacturing board that you use for our boiler controllers, you will need to add on a relay to accommodate if you are using a reversing or diverting valve with the 1000. So that's kind of the Eco 1000 in a nutshell. Now we're just going to get to our Eco 550 controller. I would say it's our more popular controller than the Eco 1000. There's a lot of different options on there, which is really nice within the 1000 controllers. But we can do the majority of most of the geothermal applications with the Eco 550 on there. So with the Eco 550, again, it's kind of the same concept. We can do heat pumps or chillers, but we can do them to a maximum of 3 stages. So we can do, 3 heat pump stages or 2 heat pump stages and a backup boiler. Again, we can do single or dual tank systems, both with outdoor reset. So that's kind of a nice feature with the Eco 550 is that we also have outdoor reset for cooling as well on there. Again, warm weather and cold weather shutdown options, a couple different options of how you want that backup boiler to come on there. But the key feature on this controller is that we have built-in Wi-Fi control on there. So you can hook up the Eco 550 to whatever Wi-Fi is available for, residential, commercial space, doesn't matter. And once you've logged in, you just download our HBX app, which is our Thermalinks hydronic network app, which is simply just branded as Thermalinks. Once you, download that for Apple or Google, you simply just add on an identifier from that controller and just hook it up to Wi-Fi, and you have full access of the whole controller right in your pocket with that Thermalinks app on there. So in terms of wiring with the Eco 550, it's very easy, which is very straightforward. Demand input number 1 is for heating. 3 and 4 again is for cooling. This could be thermostat, 24 volts, or you can just put a jumper wire between them and always activate heating or cooling call all the time on there. 5 and 6 is where you would always hook up your first stage of your heat pump on there. 7 through 10 is where you would put your sensors. So if you just hook up a sensors to pins 7 and 8, this tells the controller that we're just using a single tank system. If I were to put another sensors on pins 8, that means that I automatically tell the controller that I'm using a dual tank setup on there. So there's no options of asking you if you're using a single or dual tank system in terms of the programming. It's all just how those sensors are wired into the controller as well. If you want to do outdoor reset, you'd want to wire the outdoor sensor to pins 9. And then one thing I forgot to mention with our Eco 1000 and our Eco 550, that we give you all the sensors that are included. So you get 2 universal brass sensors, which you would put in your hot tank and cold tank, and then you get a wired outdoor box as well on there. We do have a wireless outdoor option for outdoor sensing. We kind of made that for the retrofit applications on there. So if you're doing an install and it's going to take you a while to get that outside sensor outside, just because you may have to drill through numerous walls or anything like that, we do have a wireless option, which is just our Wave 0110 sensor on there. Again, your last 3 relays are just for your additional second or third stage heat pump, or if you want us to control your main system pump. And your last relay, pins 18 and 19, is always going to be to operate that reversing valve on the Eco 550 to, again, switch over from heating to cooling and vice versa on there. In terms of the amperages, it's 240, but it's only 5 amps with the Eco 550 on there, but still a lot of, enough amperages for most, pumps and heat pumps on the market on there. So in terms of wiring, just kind of, how you would wire up, again, a dual tank heat pump. Again, you would want to wire heating or cooling demands from your thermostat. Again, it doesn't have to be an HBX thermostat. This controls universe compatible with any thermostat on the market on there. Your first stage, again, would be pins 5 and 6 in terms of your heat pump, and then 7 to 10 is where you would hook up your hot tank, cold tank, and your outdoor sensor as well. Pins number 10 is your common for all these 3 sensors, so you always want to make sure that the second wire of all these sensors are wired into that pin in pin 10 to act as your common on there. Supply power is 120, and then again, since we're only utilizing 1 heat pump, here we can control a main system pump, and then again, your reversing valve is always the last relay of that Eco 550. Again, if we're doing the same setup, but with 3 heat pump stages, you would see that, hey, pins 14, 15, 16, and 17 is for our additional second and third heat stage pump stages. In terms of, because we are doing the maximum amount of heat pumps, we're not able to control the system pump on there. You could tie in a relay to activate that system pump on heat pump stage number 1. So you have that options with relays if you want more control with pumps with the Eco 550. So in terms of the user status screen with the Eco 550, it's very straightforward. Again, all your information is all on one screen. Here you can see your hot tank, cold tank, and your outdoor temperature. Any demands that are received within the controller are always going to be above hot tank or tank. So you're going to see HD, CD, again, heating or cooling demands. You can see if it's in a WWSD, warm weather shutdown, or a CWSD, which is obviously cold weather shutdown on there. There's also a real-time clock on the top left-hand corner as well, which we'll talk about with using our Eco Switch option, where you can kind of just run your backup boiler only for a certain amount of time, or if you just want to do normal operation, it's kind of like scheduling. You have that option with the Eco 550. The 4 boxes at the bottom of the screen there acts as your system function screen, so you can see what heat pumps are on and off, as well as your backup boiler, reversing valve, or your system pump, depending on how many heat pump stages you're controlling on there. One of the cool features that we add is that you can also have a multicolored backscreen display on the Eco 550. So depending on what the system is actually doing, it'll change that color. So we just did that for troubleshooting purposes, just to help speed up the, if you were to call our tech line, we know just by, our technical support department asking you, hey, is it blue, red? We know exactly what the controller is trying to do, and we know that we're actually receiving demands from that thermostat to give it permission to fire up. In terms of navigating the controller, it's very straightforward. It's just up and down and enter. If you hold the enter button down for 2 seconds, it takes you into our setup menu. So here you're able to navigate your heat pump stages, tank temperature options, backup options. If you want to use them as an energy clock, you can do that as well, and give the controller priority and hooking the controller actually up to a Wi-Fi network on there. So if you were to get into your heat pump stage up, this really is just asking you how many heat pumps are we utilizing. Again, we can do a maximum of 3. We can adjust the lag time based off minutes, so from 1 minute to 240 minutes based off lag time. And you can also rotate your heat pumps based off time. Again, time is just, you would set a certain amount of hours, and then it will rotate, so always firing up that second heat pump or your third heat pump based off that time. You can also do them off of cycles. So again, 1 cycle is just a heat pump firing on and off is considered 1 cycle. And again, you can adjust those to 1 to 240 cycles based off rotating your heat pumps on there. Depending on how you want your heat pumps to shut off, you can have them set to on, which will just shut off based on the lag time that you have them that were to turn on those heat pumps. You can have them set them on. If you were to set those off, your heat pumps will just shut off all at the same time. So you have 2 different options of how you want those heat pumps to shut off on there. So again, in terms of your tank setup, we can have it with or without outdoor reset. If you were not doing it with outdoor reset, you would simply just enter the tank temperature that you always wanted to be for heating and cooling. You can put a differential on your tank. And the way we do our differentials is that whatever temperature you put in, we cut that in half. So say you were to put a differential of 10 degrees, it'll be 5 degrees below and above that tank temperature target on there. Here, if you were to set it to outdoor temperature off, it automatically says that. And then you can implement your warm weather shutdown as well for heating. And again, you can do cold weather shutdown in terms of your cold tank setup on there. If you are doing outdoor reset, you would just, what really is different in terms of setup is that you would put your recommended outdoor temperature for your location. So this is the temperature that you would want to put in, is that this is the coldest day that it's ever going to get in this location. And then again, you would put a differential on your tank for heating and cooling, and then you would just put a min and max tank temperatures, and based off of outdoor reset, it will fluctuate between that min and max for outdoor reset purposes on there. We also have kind of a lag time when it does get into cold weather and warm weather shutdown. So you can put a lag so it doesn't necessarily put the controller to shut off when it does go below or above those targets. We just kind of do those for the shoulder seasons when there's large outdoor temperature swings on there. That timer begins when the controller goes into either warm weather or colder shutdown. So you have that options with the Eco 550. In terms of your backup setup, I guess, again, you can have it based, coming in that backup heat source based off lag time. So again, it's just 1 minute to 240 minutes. You can have that backup boiler come on based off outdoor temperature. So once it, goes below a certain temperature, that's when, it's actually allowed to have that backup boiler to come on with your heat pump stages. We don't have an option to run the backup boiler only on the Eco 550. You could do it, with the Eco Switch, but we don't have that options like you do with the Eco 1000. And that's an option that we're probably going to be implementing later sometime this year, because that's a really popular option with the 1000 that some people would like to have on the Eco 550 as well. Again, you can have that backup boiler come off of tank temperature as well on there. So again, you have two different options of when you want that backup to fire up. In terms of priority setup, if you were to get a heating or cooling demand all at the same time, you can put a priority, that you always want heating to be over cooling or vice versa. So you do have that options in terms of your priority setup. Again, with our geothermal controllers, we can't do heating and cooling at the same time. It's either, we're doing heating. Once it's been satisfied, it'll automatically switch over to cooling if there's a demand on there. The way to do it, if you did have an application where you did want to do that for like 4 pipe systems, is that where you would need to really get 2 separate Eco 550 controllers, and we kind of do it that way in terms of navigating in terms of the setup for those 4 pipe options on there. In terms of energy clock, what really would kind of made this feature on the Eco 550 is that especially in Eastern Canada, in Ontario, like Greater Toronto, where they really had a really big spike in terms of your utility costs on there. So you can actually kind of just navigate when you want your backup boiler and heat pumps to run on based off of time on there. So it's kind of like your thermostat programming options in terms of your setbacks on there. So you could have your from 12 a.m. to 8 p.m. that I just want my backup boiler to be running, and then once it from 8 to 7, it'll run my heat pumps with my backup boiler. So it's just options to kind of save on utility costs using the energy clock set up with the Eco 550. In terms of getting the controller connected to Wi-Fi, it's very straightforward. You just would hit the second option to set up Wi-Fi. Once you do this, the controller automatically starts broadcasting a Thermalinks hydronic network. So you just open up your Apple or Android smartphone. You would just go into your Wi-Fi settings. There you would see a Thermalinks network with a 4-digit number. You would simply just connect to that network, wait for the check marks, and then open up the HBX Thermalinks app. For Android devices, it will automatically direct you into your Wi-Fi setup. For Apple devices, you simply just enter your Wi-Fi network and name and password and connect to Wi-Fi, and really that's it on there. The controller will tell you that it's connected to Wi-Fi, either through that option number 3, the connection will say connected. Will say that it's actually connected, or it will display a Wi-Fi symbol on the main status screen on the top right-hand corner with the Wi-Fi symbol, knowing that, hey, we are connected to Wi-Fi. Each controller has its own identifier, so simply by going on the app and by selecting add device, you would enter that sync code and that password, and hit the save, and it automatically will display that controller via the HBX Thermalinks app on there. So here you can see pretty much everything onto the controller. You can see your hot tank and cold tank temperatures and targets. You can see what heat pumps and backup boilers are they off? Are they on? Is my system pump on there? And it actually will give you the runtime cycles for those units as well. So that's useful. That it could be telling you that, hey, we're short cycling that system, if you just install it, where you're getting, maybe 1,000 stages after, a week or so of runtime on there. Here you can access advanced settings. So to unlock advanced settings, you need a contractor's code. So you just need to call HBX tech support. It's just a one-time thing. We give you a code and it unlocks it, and there you have full access of all the priorities and settings that you would have on the Eco 550. So it's very user-friendly for contractors, where they can just put all their installs in there, and if their clients were ever to call them in, they can just open up their phone and go into their location and adjust any parameters that they need, and maybe they maybe then enter the correct information. Maybe they need to increase their max system temperature, or maybe they just set it up incorrectly as well on there. So it's really useful, not just for the end user, but for the contractors as well, utilizing the free app on there. So that's kind of the Eco 550 in a nutshell. In terms of kind of giving other resources on the HBX website, you can get all the manuals. There's videos of how to install it. We also have a system designer, so if you are wondering what controls that you actually need in terms of the geothermal controller that may need either the 1000 or 550. And if you are doing zoning, you can go into our system designer on the website. So here, for example, if you were to select geothermal, here it just asks you a series of questions of depending on how many heat pump stages you are, if you're using backup or dual tank setup or using set points. By answering these questions, it actually will populate the recommended controls for that setup on there. So it's a nice, useful tool for contractors, wholesalers, engineers, and actually will give you a Visio wiring schematic on there as well. Just because there's so many different, stages and applications, we don't have our entire library up of those wiring schematics. So if we don't have wiring, kind of prompts up an email option where you can just simply put in your setup and it will automatically email it to our support tech support department on there, and we can give you, usually depending on through the year, usually we can give you a wiring schematic within the week that you've kind of requested that on there. So we're pretty quick in terms of getting those wiring schematics there. So that's kind of our geothermal webinar for today. Thank you guys all for joining. We'll stay on for about 5 minutes afterwards, just to answer any other questions that you may have on there. If not, you can always email at us at info@hbxcontrols.com or support@hbxcontrols.com to ask any questions on there. We also have a live chat on the HBX website as well. So if you can't get through our technical support department and you need a question answered right away, you also have a second option to type in a message, and usually goes about 3 or 4 different guys on there. We can answer them pretty quickly. So again, thank you guys for joining, and we'll talk to you soon. Yeah, this webinar will be posted probably about tomorrow on our HBX website. So if someone that couldn't get logged in, yeah, we'll be posting that in our video section on the HBX website.